The year was 2247, and humanity had finally reached the stars after centuries of dreaming about them. 12 colony worlds now carried the flag of United Earth. Each one a small piece of human civilization planted in the endless darkness of space people. Had worked hard to build these colonies, and they were proud of what they had achieved. Nobody expected what was about to happen. Captain Elena Rodriguez was on routine patrol near the edge of the Sol system when her sensors went crazy. Something massive had appeared out of nowhere, and it was bigger than anything she had ever seen. The object was 3 times the size of Earth's moon, and it was black like a piece of the void. Itself had taken physical form. Elena's hands shook as she sent an emergency transmission back to Earth Command. This is Captain Rodriguez of the patrol vessel Horizon, and I am reporting an unknown object of incredible size at the edge of our system. She said into her communicator, "It just appeared out of thin air, and I have never seen anything like it." Within minutes, every government on Earth knew about the alien vessel. President Amara Okonkwo was in her office when the alert came through, and she immediately called for an emergency meeting of the Global Defense Council. The leaders of every nation gathered in the Great Hall of the United Earth headquarters, and they all watched the screens with fear and wonder in their eyes. Then, alien ships sent a message. The transmission showed a creature unlike anything humans had. Imagined Ambassador Kethvorin of the Galactic Council had gray skin that seemed to shimmer like metal, and his eyes were completely black with no wide set. All he spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding stones, and the translation software worked hard to convert his words into human language. People of Earth. The alien began. "We are the Galactic Council, and we have watched your species for many of your centuries. We have seen your wars and your violence, and we have seen how you treat each other and other living things. In our 10,000 years of managing this galaxy, we have never seen a species so young that is also so dangerous." President Okonkwo leaned forward in her chair as she listened to every word. The alien continued speaking, and his tone became harder and colder. "You have 3 demands that you must follow," Kethvorin said. "First, you will stop all expansion beyond your solar system immediately. Second, you will surrender all your military vessels to us so they can be destroyed. Third, and most important, you will submit to genetic modification that will remove what we call the aggression marker from your species." Gasps filled the room as people heard this final demand. The Council wanted to change human DNA itself and remove the part that made humans fight and struggle and never give up. "This is not a request," the ambassador said with cold certainty. "You have 1 rotation of your planet to accept these terms. If you refuse, then we will be forced to sanitize your world for the safety of all other species in the galaxy. Sanitize means we will destroy everything and everyone on your planet. The choice is yours." The transmission ended, and silence filled the Great Hall. Admiral James Chun was the first to speak, and his voice was heavy with frustration. "Madam President, their technology is far beyond anything we have," he said. "Our ships would be like toys against that vessel. We cannot win a fight against them." Dr. Sarah Kim, the chief scientist, nodded her head sadly. "The Admiral is right," she added. "They have weapons and shields and engines that we cannot even understand. Fighting them would be suicide for our entire species." The diplomats began talking about negotiation and buying time. Maybe they could convince the Council to give humanity more years to prove they could be peaceful. Maybe there was some way to avoid this terrible choice. President Okonkwo sat quietly and listened to everyone speak. She thought about her children and her grandchildren. She thought about all the humans who had worked so hard to build civilization across the stars. She thought about every soldier who had ever died protecting freedom, and she thought about what it meant to be human. When everyone had finished speaking, she stood up slowly. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. I have heard your words and I understand your fears, she said. But I want you all to think about something very important. What kind of species would we be if we let someone change who we are and our very core? What would be left of humanity if we removed the fire that makes us fight for what we believe in? General Marcus Chun, who commanded the Outer Fleet, spoke up. Madam President, what are you saying? He asked. Are you suggesting we refuse their demands? President Okonkwo looked at him with steel in her eyes. General, I am not suggesting anything, she replied. I am telling you what we are going to do. She walked to the transmission array, and the technicians quickly prepared to send a message back to the alien vessel. Every human on Earth and every colony world watched as their president stood before the camera. Her voice was calm and clear, and it carried the weight of all human history behind it. To the Galactic Council, she began. We have received your terms and we have considered them carefully. We reject every single one of them. You want us to stop reaching for the stars, but that is who we are. You want us to give up our weapons, but we will never leave ourselves defenseless. You want to change our very nature, but we would rather die as humans than live as something less. She paused and took a deep breath before speaking the words that would change everything. Consider this our formal declaration of war against the Galactic Council. You may have ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years, but you have never faced humanity. We will not go quietly into the darkness. We will not beg for mercy. We will fight you with everything we have, and we will make you pay for every inch you try to take from us. You have made a terrible mistake by threatening our home. Now you will learn why every species should fear the children of Earth. We suggest you start running. The transmission ended, and for a moment nobody moved. Then across the Sol system, every human vessel powered up its engines on. The colony world's people looked up at the sky and felt something stir in their hearts. On Earth, soldiers and civilians alike stood a little taller. They did not know if they could win this war. They did not know if humanity would survive. But they knew one thing with absolute certainty. They would rather die fighting than live on their knees. And somewhere on the massive alien vessel, Ambassador Kethvorin felt something he had not experienced in 300 years of service to the Council. For the first time in his long life, he felt the cold touch of fear. These humans were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, and the war for survival had just begun. Ambassador Kethvorin stood before the communication screen, and he could not believe what he had just heard. In his 300 years of service to the Galactic Council, he had negotiated the surrender of 47 different species. Some had begged for mercy, and others had tried to bargain for better terms. A few had even wept as they signed away their freedom. But not once in all that time had any species declared war on the Council. He turned to High Admiral Yethmora, who commanded the Council fleet. Admiral, did I hear that correctly? Kethvorin asked. Did these primitives just threaten us with war? Yethmora made a sound that was similar to human laughter. They are fools. The Admiral replied. Their technology is centuries behind ours, and their ships are like insects compared to our vessels. This will not be a war, Ambassador. It will be an extermination that takes less time than a meal. Kethvorin nodded, but something bothered him deep inside. He had studied human history for many years, and he knew things that the Admiral did not seem to understand. These creatures had fought each other constantly throughout their existence. They had survived plagues and famines and natural disasters that would have ended most species, and every time they fell, they somehow found a way to rise again. Perhaps we should be cautious, he said quietly. These humans may surprise us. The Admiral dismissed his concerns with a wave of one of his 4 arms. Prepare the fleet for departure, Yethmora commanded. We will end this rebellion before it even begins. On Earth, President Okonkwo called General Marcus Chun to her private office. General was an old soldier who had served in 3 different conflicts. and he knew war better than anyone. "General, I need you to be honest with me," the president said. "What are our real chances of survival?" Chun looked at her with tired eyes. "If we fight them directly, we will lose," he admitted. "Their ships are faster and stronger, and their weapons can destroy our vessels before we even get close enough to fire. In a straight battle, they would crush us in days." The president nodded slowly. "That is what I expected you to say. But I did not ask about a straight battle, did I?" A small smile appeared on the general's face. "No, Madam President. You did not." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small data device. "For 200 years, our greatest minds have been preparing for this exact situation," he explained. "We always knew that one day we might meet an enemy we could not defeat through normal means. So we developed something we call the Doctrine of Spite." President Okonkwo raised an eyebrow. "The Doctrine of Spite?" She repeated. "That is an interesting name." Chun activated the data device and holographic images filled the room. "The doctrine is based on a simple idea," he said. "If we cannot win, then we make sure our enemy regrets ever fighting us. We make the cost of destroying humanity so high that no rational enemy would be willing to pay it. Even if we die, we take as much of them with us as possible." The president studied the images carefully. "Show me what we have, General." Chun began explaining the secret projects that humanity had kept hidden for decades. The first was called the Prometheus Array. These are satellites hidden throughout our solar system. Chun said, "They can grab asteroids and accelerate them to incredible speeds. When an asteroid hits something at 3% of light speed, the impact is devastating. No shield can stop pure mass moving that fast." The second project was the Leviathan Protocol. "We have ships hidden in deep space beyond the edges of our system," the general continued. "They carry frozen human embryos and complete records of our culture and history. Even if Earth falls and every colony burns, those ships will survive. They will travel for thousands of years until they find new homes. Humanity can never truly be destroyed because part of us will always escape." But it was the third project that made the president's breath catch in her throat. "This is the Hellfire Initiative," Chun said quietly. "Buried beneath the surface of our moon is a facility that produces antimatter weapons. A single warhead the size of a human fist can destroy a ship the size of a city. We have been building them in secret for 50 years. President Okonkwo sat down heavily in her chair. "Why did I not know about these projects?" She asked. Chun's face was serious. "Because some secrets must be kept even from presidents," he replied. "The people who created these programs knew that one day a leader might be tempted to surrender. They wanted to make sure that option did not exist. Now you know the truth, and now you must decide how to use these weapons." The president was silent for a long time. "How many people know about this?" she finally asked. "Enough," Chun answered. "Scientists and soldiers and engineers who have dedicated their entire lives to making sure humanity survives. They are ready to fight and they are ready to die. All they need is your order." President Okonkwo stood and walked to the window. She looked out at the city below where millions of people went about their daily lives. Children played in parks and workers rushed to their jobs, and old couples walked hand in hand through the streets. None of them knew that everything they loved could be destroyed within days. But she also saw something else in those people. She saw the strength that had carried humanity through every challenge. She saw the stubborn refusal to give up that had defined her species since the beginning. She saw warriors waiting to be awakened. "General Chun," she said, without turning around, "activate all 3 projects immediately. I want every weapon we have ready to fire, and I want the council to know exactly what they are facing." The general saluted. "It will be done, Madam President," as he left her. Office President Okonkwo prepared to address humanity one final time before the battle began. She spoke to every human on every world, and her words were carried across the stars. my fellow humans," she said. "An enemy has come to destroy us because they fear what we might become. They want to take away our freedom and change who we are. They believe we will submit like other species have done before. They are wrong. We may not be the strongest species in the galaxy. We may not have the best technology or the biggest ships, but we have something they will never understand. We have the human spirit, that fire inside us that refuses to die no matter how hard the universe tries to put it out. Today we fight not because we know we will win. We fight because some things are worth dying for. Our freedom is worth dying for. Our children's future is worth dying for. And if we must fall, then we will fall like humans, standing tall and spitting defiance into the face of our enemies. They wanted us to surrender? Instead, we give them war." Across the galaxy, the Galactic Council heard her words, and for the first time in 10,000 years, they began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. The humans were not behaving like any species they had encountered before. These creatures seemed to welcome death, if it meant taking their enemies with them. High Admiral Yethmara ordered the fleet to advance, but even he could not shake the strange feeling growing in his chest. Something was very wrong with this situation, and he was about to find out just how wrong it truly was. The Council fleet moved through space like a swarm of metal predators, hungry for blood. 1,200 warships advanced toward Earth, and each one carried enough firepower to burn entire continents into ash high. Admiral Yethmara stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and he watched the human solar system grow larger on his screens. "How long until we reach their inner worlds?" he asked his navigation officer. 6 standard hours, Admiral," came the reply. "Their outer defenses appear to be minimal. This will be easier than we anticipated." Yethmara allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. These foolish humans had chosen death over submission, and now they would receive exactly what they asked for. But General Marcus Chun had been preparing for this moment his entire life. Stood in the command center of humanity's hidden war station, buried deep beneath the ice of Europa. One of Jupiter's moons, around him hundreds of officers worked at their stations, tracking every movement of the enemy fleet. "The Council ships will pass Jupiter in approximately 4 hours," his tactical officer reported. "They are moving in a standard attack formation, with their largest vessels protected in the center." Chan studied the enemy positions carefully. "They are overconfident," he said. "They think this will be easy." He turned to his communications officer. "Send the signal to all Prometheus stations. Tell them to prepare for immediate activation. And get me Captain Rodriguez." Captain Elena Rodriguez was the same officer who had first spotted the alien vessel now. She commanded the Valkyrie Squadron, a group of 50 pilots who had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. Her voice came through the speakers clear and steady. "Valkyrie Squadron ready and waiting, General. What are your orders?" Chun took a deep breath. "Captain, you and your pilots know what you signed up for. When the Council fleet reaches Jupiter, you will launch your attack. Your ships are carrying antimatter warheads. Get as close as you can before they detect you, and then deliver your payloads." There was a brief pause on the line. "Understood, General," Rodriguez replied. "It has been an honor serving with you. Give them hell for us." Valkyrie Squadron out. Chung closed his eyes for just a moment. 50 brave men and women were about to die, and he was the one sending them to their deaths, but their sacrifice might save billions. The hours passed slowly as the Council fleet approached high. Admiral Yethmara grew more relaxed with each passing minute. Human ships had retreated from the outer system, and it seemed like they had accepted their fate. Perhaps they have finally realized how hopeless their situation is, he said to Ambassador Kethvoran, who had come to watch the victory. "Perhaps," the ambassador replied, but his voice carried doubt. "Or perhaps they are planning something." Yethmara laughed. "What could they possibly plan? Their ships cannot match ours, and their weapons cannot penetrate our shields. This is not a battle, ambassador. This is an execution. At that exact moment, the Prometheus array came to life. 17 asteroids that had been quietly positioned over the past 50 years suddenly changed direction. Massive engines hidden on their surfaces activated and pushed them forward with incredible force. They accelerated faster and faster until they were moving at 3% of the speed of light, and they were all heading directly toward the Council fleet. The first warning came from a sensor officer on one of the Council frigates. Admiral, we are detecting multiple objects approaching at impossible speeds. They appear to be asteroids, that they are moving far too fast. Yeth, Mara, turned to his screen, and his eyes went wide. Raise all shields, he screamed. Evasive maneuvers immediately. But it was too late. The first asteroid hit a Council destroyer, and the ship simply vanished. One moment it was there, and the next moment it was an expanding cloud of debris and fire. The shields that could stop plasma and energy weapons were useless against raw mass moving at relativistic speeds. 98 Council ships were destroyed in the first 60 seconds of the battle. Ethmara stared at his screens in disbelief as ship after ship disappeared. This is impossible. He shouted, "Where did these weapons come from? How did they hide them from our sensors?" Before anyone could answer, the second wave of the human attack began from the moons of Jupiter. Small ships erupted into space. The Valkyrie squadron and dozens of other drone vessels, piloted by human volunteers, flew directly into the chaos of the scattered Council fleet. Each ship carried a single antimatter warhead. Captain Rodriguez led the charge, and her voice rang out across the communication channels. "All ships, this is Valkyrie leader. Pick your targets and make your deaths count. For Earth and for humanity." The Council point defense systems began firing, but there were too many human ships coming from too many directions. Rodriguez dodged and weaved through the enemy fire with skill born from years of training. She saw several of her pilots die in flashes of light, but she kept going. Her target was a Council cruiser 3 times the size of her tiny vessel. "This is for everyone you threaten to kill," she whispered. She armed her warhead and flew directly into the ship's engine section. Antimatter explosion tore the cruiser apart from the inside. The Battle of Jupiter's Eye, as humans would later call it, lasted 11 hours when it finally ended. The Council had lost 406 ships, more vessels than they have lost in the previous 1,000 years combined. Humanity had lost everything stationed beyond Mars. Every pilot in the Valkyrie squadron was dead. Thousands of soldiers and sailors had given their lives, but they had done something that no species had ever done before. They had made the Galactic Council bleed. High Admiral Yeth Morris stood in the ruins of his bridge, surrounded by damaged equipment and fallen officers. His flagship had survived, but barely. "Get me the Council elders," he said in a voice that shook with shock and rage. "They need to know what has happened here." On Earth, the celebrations were brief, because everyone knew this was just the beginning. President Okonkwo addressed her people once more. "Today our brave soldiers proved that we are not helpless," she said. "Today we showed the galaxy that humanity will not go quietly into the darkness. But this war is far from over. The Council will send more ships. They will try again and again until they succeed or until they are broken. We must be ready to fight for as long as it takes." General Chun stood beside her, and his eyes were red from exhaustion and grief. Thought of Captain Rodriguez and all the other pilots who had sacrificed themselves. They had bought humanity time, but how much remained to be seen across the galaxy. Other species watched the battle recordings in stunned silence. The Velthari, who had been enslaved by the Council for 2,000 years, began to whisper among themselves. The Orcs, who had surrendered without resistance, felt shame burning in their hearts. The Kethmari, the Yulvaks, and dozens of other conquered races saw something they had never seen before. They saw hope. If these humans could stand against the mighty Council, then perhaps others could too. Perhaps It was time for the galaxy to remember what freedom meant on the Council homeworld. The elders gathered for the first time in centuries. They had ruled the galaxy with absolute power for 10,000 years. No species had ever truly challenged them until now. What do? One elder asked. We send more ships. Another answered, we crush them completely. But the oldest elder, the one who had seen more history than any other being alive, shook his head slowly. You do not understand, he said. We have already lost. Not this battle and perhaps not this war. But we have lost something far more important. We have lost the illusion of our invincibility. Every slave species in the galaxy now knows that we can be hurt. The humans have lit a fire that will spread across the stars, and I fear we will never be able to put it out. The war was just beginning, and humanity was ready to burn the galaxy down if that was what it took to be free. 3 more council fleets came to destroy humanity, and 3 more council fleets met their end in the darkness of space. But victory always came with a terrible price. Mars fell on the 207th day of the war. The council bombarded the red planet from orbit and turned its surface into a wasteland of fire and ash. General Chem had evacuated most of the colonists just hours before the attack, but thousands still died when the bombs began to fall. President Okonkwo watched the destruction from Earth and tears rolled down her cheeks. How many more worlds will we lose? She asked quietly. As many as it takes, Chun replied. But for every world they burn, we will make them pay in blood. The lunar bases fell next, and humanity retreated to its final defensive line around Earth. Billions of people looked up at the sky each night wondering if the next day would be their last, but still they refused to surrender. On the colony world of New Geneva, a young soldier named Thomas Park wrote a letter to his family before his final battle. I know I am going to die tomorrow, he wrote. The council ships are coming, and we do not have enough soldiers to stop them. But I want you to know that I am not afraid. I am proud to be human. I am proud to fight for our freedom, and I am proud to make the enemy pay for every step they take toward our home. Do not mourn for me. Remember me as someone who stood when others would have kneeled. Thomas Park died the next day along with 12,000 other defenders of New Geneva, but they took 50,000 council soldiers with them. This was the human way of war. Every battle became a meat grinder that consumed both sides. Human soldiers used tactics that the council had never encountered because no civilized species would ever use them. They pretended to surrender and then detonated nuclear weapons hidden in their own bodies. They crashed damaged ships into enemy vessels instead of ejecting to safety. They fought until their weapons were empty, and then they fought with knives and fists and teeth. General Chun's strategies spread across the galaxy through captured communication networks. Other species began to study human military doctrine with growing fascination. The Valkyrie War Council met in secret for the first time in 2,000 years. Look at what the humans have done, their leader said. They have killed more council soldiers in 1 year than we lost in our entire war of submission. They have no fear of death. They have no concept of honorable surrender. They simply fight until they are destroyed, and they take as many enemies with them as possible. A young Valkyrie warrior stood up to speak. Then perhaps it is time we learn from them, she said. Perhaps it is time we remembered what our ancestors knew before the council came. We were warriors once. We can be warriors again. The Valkyrie rebellion began 3 days later when they destroyed the council garrison on their homeworld. Within a week, 17 more species had risen against their masters. The galaxy was on fire, and humanity had been the spark. Ambassador Kethvorin watched the reports coming in from across council space, and he felt despair settling into his heart. Everything the council had built over 10,000 years was crumbling. How is this happening? He asked no one in particular. How can one primitive species cause so much destruction? He requested a meeting with President Okonkwo through secure channels too. His surprise, she agreed. Her face appeared on his screen, looking older and more tired than before. War had aged her terribly, but her eyes still burned with defiance. "Ambassador," she said with cold politeness, "I did not expect to hear from you again. Have you come to offer better terms?" Cathvorin shook his head. "I have come to understand," he replied. "I have studied your species for decades, but I clearly missed something important. How do you continue fighting when victory is impossible? How do you keep sending your people to die when you know they cannot win?" President Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment. "You really do not understand, do you?" she finally said. "That is why you will lose this war. You think we fight because we expect to win. You think survival is our primary goal. But you are wrong, Ambassador. We fight because fighting is who we are. We fight because there are things worse than death, living on our knees begging for mercy from creatures who see us as animals to be modified and controlled. That would not be life. That would be the death of everything that makes us human." She leaned closer to the screen. "You wanted to remove our aggression?" She continued. "You wanted to make us peaceful and docile like the other species you have conquered. That aggression is not a flaw, Ambassador. It is our greatest strength. It is the fire that pushed us out of caves and into space. It is the rage that lets a mother fight a predator twice her size to protect her children. It is the stubborn refusal to accept that anything is impossible. And now, thanks to your arrogance, you have reminded the entire galaxy what happens when free beings refuse to kneel. Look around you, Ambassador. Look at the rebellion spreading across your empire. We did that, not with weapons or ships, but with an idea. The idea that freedom is worth dying for. You cannot kill an idea, Ambassador, and you cannot conquer a species that would rather be destroyed than submit." Cathvorin stared at her, and he finally understood the Council had made a terrible mistake. They had treated this war as a simple matter of superior firepower against inferior enemies. But the humans were not fighting a military campaign. They were fighting a spiritual war for the soul of the galaxy, and they were winning. "What will you do if you somehow survive this?" he asked. "Will you conquer the galaxy as we did? Will you become the new masters?" Okonkwo shook her head. "We do not want to rule anyone," she said. "We just want to be free. And we want to help everyone else who wants the same thing. When this war ends, and it will end, we will not build an empire. We will build something better. A galaxy where every species can choose its own path. Where no one has the right to tell others how to live. That is what we are fighting for, Ambassador. That is what your people will never understand." The transmission ended, and Cathvorin sat alone in the darkness. For the first time in his long life, he found himself hoping that humanity would win. Perhaps they were exactly what the galaxy needed, a species too stubborn to die and too brave to surrender, a species that could teach the universe how to be free. War continued to rage across the stars. But now it was not just humanity fighting alone now. It was an army of free beings united by a single idea. And the Galactic Council was running out of time. 7 years of war had changed everything. The galaxy that the Council had ruled with absolute power for 10,000 years was gone. In its place was chaos and fire and the sound of chains breaking on 200 worlds. President Amara Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the ESS Defiance, and she looked out at the stars with tired eyes. Her hair had turned completely gray during the war, and her face carried lines that had not been there before. She had sent millions of her people to their deaths. She had watched worlds burn and civilizations crumble, but she had not surrendered, and neither had humanity. General Marcus Chen stood beside her as he had throughout the entire conflict. "The Council fleet is approaching, Madam President," he said, "but this time they are not coming to fight. They are coming to surrender." The words sounded strange, even as he spoke them. For 7 years the Council had been the enemy. the unstoppable force that would destroy humanity if given the chance, and now they were broken. The Defiance was humanity's first true interstellar warship built during the war using captured Council technology. Human scientists had studied the alien engines and weapons and shields. They had learned how they worked, and then they had made them better. It turned out that humans were very good at improving things designed to kill across the galaxy. The rebellions had spread like wildfire. The Velthari had liberated their entire sector, and their warriors had become legends. Orcs who had once surrendered without fighting had found their courage. Again, even the Kethmari, the most peaceful species in known space, had risen against their Council overseers, all because humanity had shown them that the Masters could bleed. The Council elders arrived on a small diplomatic vessel with no weapons and no guards. They were the oldest and most powerful beings in the galaxy, but today they looked small and afraid. Ambassador Kethvorin was with them, and his eyes met President Okonkwo's as he stepped onto the Defiance. "Madam President," he said with a bow, "I remember our first conversation when I delivered the Council's demands. I thought you were fools for refusing. I thought your species would be dust within a month. I was wrong about everything." Okonkwo nodded slowly. "Yes, Ambassador, you were, but I do not blame you for your mistakes. You had never met a species like us before. How could you possibly have known what we were capable of?" The signing of the surrender took place in the main hall of the Defiance representatives. From every species that had joined the rebellion were there to witness history. The terms were simple because President Okonkwo had written them herself. No species would ever be subjugated again. No forced genetic modification would ever be permitted. Every world would have the right to govern itself, and the Galactic Council would be dissolved forever. Eldest of the Council elders placed his mark on the document with shaking hands. "It is done," he said quietly. 10,000 years of order and stability destroyed by a single species. "I hope you are proud of what you have accomplished." General Chun stepped forward, and his voice was hard. "Order?" he repeated. "Stability? You call slavery and domination order? You call crushing the spirit of every species you encountered stability? What you built was a prison, elder, and we have torn down its walls." The elder looked at him with ancient eyes. "And what will you build in its place?" he asked. "You have destroyed the only system of government this galaxy has ever known. Chaos will follow. Wars will erupt between species that were kept apart by our laws. Millions will die in the conflicts to come. Is that what you wanted?" President Okonkwo stepped between them. "What we wanted was freedom," she said. "Freedom is messy and complicated, and yes, sometimes it leads to conflict. But it is better than the alternative. It is better than living under the heel of masters who decide what you are allowed to be." She turned to address everyone in the room. "We did not start this war to conquer the galaxy," she continued. "We started it because you gave us no other choice. You wanted to change who we are. You wanted to remove the fire that makes us human. And we said no. That single word changed everything. No, the most powerful word in any language. The word that tyrants fear more than any weapon. No, I will not submit. No, I will not surrender. No, I will not become what you want me to be." She looked directly at the Council elders. "You asked what we will do now that we have power," she said. "The answer is simple. We will help others stand on their own feet. We will teach them that they do not need masters. We will show them that freedom is possible if you are willing to fight for it. And then we will step back and let them find their own way, because that is what humans do. We fight not to conquer, but to make sure no one ever has to bow again." Ambassador Kethvorin listened to her words, and something changed inside him. For 300 years he had served the VS Council. He had believed that the galaxy needed rulers, and that the Council was the best choice. But now he saw a different path, a path where species worked together as equals instead of masters and slaves. A path where freedom was the highest value. A path that humanity had shown was possible, Madam President. He said, stepping forward, I would like to offer my services. I have spent my life as a diplomat. Perhaps I could help build this new galaxy you are describing. Okonkwo studied him for a long moment. Why? She asked. What changed your mind? Kethvorin thought about his answer carefully. When I first met your species, I saw you as primitives. He admitted, violent and dangerous creatures that needed to be controlled. But during this war, one learned something important. I learned that your violence comes from love. Love for your families and your homes and your freedom. I learned that. Your stubbornness comes from hope. Hope that tomorrow can be better than today. And I learned that your refusal to surrender comes from faith. Faith that some things are worth dying for. These are not weaknesses, Ambassador, to be cured. These are the greatest strengths any species can have. I want to help build a galaxy that celebrates these qualities instead of fearing them. President Okonkwo extended her hand in the human gesture of friendship. Welcome to the rebellion, Ambassador. We have a lot of work to do. The ceremony ended and the delegates departed to their homeworlds. War was over, but the real challenge was just beginning building. A free galaxy would be harder than fighting a war, but humanity had never backed down from a challenge before. Years later, a monument was built on Earth to honor everyone who had died in the war. It stood in the center of New Geneva, the capital of the free galaxy. The inscription was simple, but it carried the weight of all that had happened. They called us primitives. They called us violent. They were right, and they learned why those things made us dangerous. Here lie the heroes who taught the galaxy how to be free. The Galactic Council had sent Earth a warning. Earth had replied with a declaration of war, and the galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had not just survived. They had changed everything. They had lit a fire that would burn across the stars, forever, a fire called freedom, and it would never be extinguished.